I've seen this before, but I don't remember when he did it. Fucking Beans pretending to smoke like a cigar. This is 165. You start the stream. I'm for episode 165. The Ego Chall Podcast is right now in the first set. CDL, Major 2 qualifiers. Join us on Twitch or YouTube. Boom. Testing Twitch. Do I sound quiet to you? Testing 1, 2, 3. I think I was just low volume wise. Yeah. Oh, okay. It's got to be just like when I move the arm or whatever. Because like when if I play Marvel Rivals or anything on the PlayStation, I have to move this arm over to the other side, so it's not where my monitor is. So that's probably I just have to get used to finding that sweet spot for the arm.
Yeah. Did you tweet?
Yep.
All right, you ready to get started?
Dessert.
Hello and welcome to episode 165 of the Ego Chall Podcast. My name is Preston Byers, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Justin Binkowski. And on today's episode, we're talking about the first week of the Major 3 qualifiers in the Call of Duty League. We had a bunch of roster changes happen leading up to this set of qualifiers, and while I think there's still a lot to learn and to figure out about a lot of these teams, I do feel like we have learned a little bit about many of these teams already, and we'll talk about all of that during the course of this episode. But before we get to any of it, how are you doing, Bink?
Doing all right. Like we were just talking about a couple minutes ago off stream, pretty big day for UConn Nation. So shout out Paige Beckers and Gino and the whole UConn women's team for winning that 12th national championship. Pretty impressive feat there. But yeah, while that was going on in the sports world, we had a pretty jam-packed, entertaining weekend of Call of Duty matches. I feel like heading into this weekend, there were a lot of matches that were super entertaining for multiple different reasons, or just highly anticipated matches, I guess. And they certainly lived up to the hype in some regards, but then even some matches that maybe we overlooked a little bit came in and were even a bit of bangers here and there too. So it was a pretty good weekend overall, and ready to break it all down.
The biggest, of course, being just because they are the most popular team in the league. There's a lot of wonder about what OpTic Texas would look like with this new roster. Huke coming back into the lineup in place of Pred, Skies still being there after coming in for Kenny before Major 2. And of course, something that we talked about, what we couldn't talk about like as a confirmation or anything, Kenny officially joined the Minnesota Rocker late last week, right before their match against OpTic Texas, which set up this revenge match, or this very highly anticipated matchup between OpTic Texas and the Minnesota Rocker, including Kenny. And that match did not disappoint. OpTic Texas nearly loses it, and it goes down to a Game 5, Round 11. And unfortunately, Kenny does not really get to take part in the festivities, so to speak. He gets team killed by an RC car, and Skies has an incredible moment, probably his greatest moment so far as a member of OpTic, which isn't really saying a whole lot. But OpTic wins this match, which is definitely we'll talk about their second match in just a little bit, but that win had to have been huge for OpTic to one, get to another S&D. They lost the first S&D, and to win, and just to win a match. Obviously, that has not been a guarantee by any means over the past 7 weeks now. Basically, from the time that they dropped Huke, it was like, okay, like maybe we're not going to win again. They only won one qualifier in all of stage 2 or whatever you want to call it. They won one match at the major, and now we'll talk about it, but they're now 2-0 in the qualifiers because they had a relatively simple, almost squash match. It felt like against Cloud9. Not as heavily in favor of OpTic as the last time they played, like early in the season, where it felt like Cloud9 were like, they couldn't even shoot back at some points. But OpTic goes 2-0. They beat Kenny. They have definitely the most momentum that they've had in like 2 months. Do you think this is a sign for OpTic that, okay, this roster has a chance to actually work out, or is this just 2 matches against teams that have proven to be kind of up and down throughout the season?
Yeah, I mean, I'm still not ready to, say OpTic is winning Major 3 or anything like that, because I do think it is important to keep in mind the teams they were playing. But I think, obviously, especially when they go 2-0, after having the qualifier stage, they had previously had a Major 2. Like, anything outside of 2-0 for them in these matches would have been like, the green wall would have been the green wall. And especially this first match against Minnesota, with Minnesota having Kenny. If they lost to Minnesota and lost to Kenny after dropping him, like, these, you would sound the alarms and people would have been panicking and stuff like that. And I don't think it's necessarily the same for the C9 match, but still, just because of the state of how poorly their last Major 2 qualifier section went for them, like, this is just a massive week. Obviously, they can't do better than 2-0, but they took care of business, and it's the best qualifier week they've had in a while. So, and not necessarily ironically, but I mean, it kind of lines up with Huke's back in the lineup, and they did pretty well in the Major 1 qualifiers once Huke replaced Pred that time around. Obviously, it didn't go as well on land for them, but that's a different story. So, yeah, I think that was my main takeaway really for them, was like, it's great that they got these 2 wins. Especially great for them that they were able to beat Kenny, because like I said, I think that would have been like, there's even Scump talking about it on the watch party before the match, like, God, if we lose to Minnesota, we're screwed. Like, basically that sort of mentality. So it was almost like a must-win match, not even just because of like where the teams are in the standings or anything, but just from a narrative standpoint, and trying to justify the roster move for breaking up the team that won champs, all that. So it was definitely a pretty, especially the first series here between Minnesota and OpTic. Like, I watched the OpTic podcast with the 4 guys, Skies, Shotzi, Dashy, and Huke, and Skies is the one who is saying like he thinks they're going to be a really good Neslo team when it comes to search and destroys and controls. And in this series, they, at least after the first 2 maps, or 3 maps, they won the Hardpoint. It was a really close 20-point Hardpoint game that I wrote down. They went back and forth, and it felt like it could have gone either way, really, at multiple points. But then Minnesota takes the rewind search in map 2. And they win the control 3-1 with Kenny leading the lobby in kills. So that's kind of like, OpTic's looking back, and it's like they're down 2-1, and we hear that they're expecting to be a good, Neslo team, and they got a Hardpoint coming up. So like, was that potentially, them like leaving the door open for Minnesota to steal a win? And then OpTic just, to Minnesota's credit, they did look strong to start the protocol control map 4, and they made like a 60-ish point comeback and scored 110 straight points essentially to take that one 250 to 207. And then, kind of like you said, it came down to a game 5 round 11 where Huke got team killed by the RC car, but really it was Huke, or I said Kenny got team killed by the RC car, but it was Huke shooting the RC car that Estriel called in near Kenny, if I remember correctly, and Sky's got 3 kills with a pistol down in that lower protocol bomb site. That's just pure chaos. So, yeah, I credit to Minnesota making it as close as possible. I mean, this is we'll talk a little bit more about Minnesota, I'm sure too, but they had 2 Game 5 round 11 matches this week, and that's even before this Kenny iteration of the roster. I've at least been pretty vocal about like that's been Minnesota's MO this entire season. Like they get to Game 5s a lot, whether it's forcing reverse sweeps or uh you know, any other avenue, but they seem to play in a lot of Game 5s, and they're able to clutch up in some, and obviously other times it doesn't go their way, but they've been getting a lot of reps, and I think for that 3-man young core they have with Estriel, Gio, and Nero, just more reps and that sort of thing, that could be a scary trio, and if Kenny gets them playing, under his leadership and whatnot, I think Minnesota has the potential to definitely make a late season push here. So I don't think it's all doom and gloom for Minnesota, even though they weren't able to get the job done against OpTic here in that first match and Kenny's first match against his former team. And yeah, the Clyde-9 match, kind of like you said, I mean, was it the only? No, Vancouver 3-0'd Vegas. There were a couple technically 3-0, so scratch that. But yeah, I just think, the last time OpTic and C9 played, we talked about it last episode, there was like the online server issue talk and all that. And this was kind of like just a showdown that, for as far as we know, there wasn't any of that stuff going on in this match in particular, but it was kind of like the same outcome despite that. So definitely encouraging signs for OpTic. We'll have to see how C9 responds in their other matches coming up, because they're also one of those teams that's like on the outside looking into the champs picture, even though they've been playing better of late during the Major 2 qualifiers and Major 2 itself. So yeah, overall pretty solid weekend for OpTic fans. You got to be happy with 2-0, especially when you went through a 0-18 map streak.
Yeah, I was looking up the map win-loss records for OpTic when they had Pred in the lineup and when they had Huke in the lineup. Obviously, it's going to be way, way worse with Pred in the lineup because they had that bad losing streak and they really couldn't, especially in S&D. They lost a bunch of Game 5, so that adds up rather quickly. But I just thought it was interesting that with Huke in the lineup, their best game mode is like S&D, I think, just to make sure. Yeah, so they were 65% win percentage with Huke in the lineup in S&D. With Pred in the lineup, they were winning like 15% of their S&Ds. And obviously, Hardpoint was OpTic's best game mode with Pred. It's even better with Huke. Granted, these lineups are not the same. We're talking about, Kenny being in the lineup, before, and now Sky's in the lineup. But I just thought it was interesting that it does seem like Control will be the swing mode, as it always is. But that has consistently been kind of a point that OpTic has struggled with. Even with Huke in the lineup, he's, with Huke, they are 7-6 in Control this season. OpTic is. So that's going to be the big kind of what if they're able to pull off these Neslos or whatever. Like it's going to be tough if they are kind of like 500 in Control, especially against the top teams. And I think that's probably the biggest point I have here is it is a really good sign that OpTic won these 2 series this weekend, but we never really should have been in a place where we're questioning if OpTic can beat like the 8th or 9th best team in the CDL, because that's something that we should certainly expect of a team like OpTic. Right now, granted, we are in that stage, so it's a good thing that they did this. But if they are to take the next step, obviously the plausible or the logical next step is, can they beat Toronto? Can they beat Vancouver? Can they beat Carolina? And then you kind of keep moving up the standings And if they obviously can beat Atlanta and LAT consistently, then that's something that we can say, okay, OpTic is actually a contender and they're to be reckoned with. We shouldn't underestimate them anymore. But I don't think we're quite there yet. But this is just a very good sign to start all of that. And as for Kenny, obviously, I think it's good. His stock had never been lower since he became a professional Call of Duty player. Even before then, obviously, because he was like 16 years old and he was considered to be like next up, basically. But this was a good weekend for him, even if the results weren't necessarily the best. And I'm sure, I don't know what the emotions or the feelings are with him about playing against OpTic, like if that meant a lot to him, if there is anger or resentment or whatever kind of feelings about OpTic at the moment. But, I think it would have been big, and I'm sure it's a little bit disappointing not to beat them in particular. But he performed pretty well. I think the timeline was certainly much more in favor of Kenny and very much more supportive of Kenny this weekend than they have been pretty much all season long, which was good to see. But yeah, OpTic 2-0 to start off the qualifiers. Right now, they're in first place in the qualifiers because they're the only team that had 2 matches that won both of them. But that's an awesome sight to see, especially when they went 1-6 last time.
Last time they had Huke in the lineup, they finished the Major 1 qualifiers in first place, but obviously that led to a first round upset in the winners bracket at Major 1. So you can look at it multiple ways, I guess, right now.
Yeah, that was the last point I wanted to bring up was now that they're 2-0 in these qualifiers, OpTic is 7-0 with Huke in the online qualifiers. They're not perfect online because they did not have a great minor performance, or I can't say they didn't have a great minor performance, but they did not go undefeated in that first minor. So, but that's pretty crazy that they're 7-0 with Huke in these online qualifiers. And I don't even know what that leaves them with Pred. They've won 2 matches, I think, total with Pred in online qualifiers. So probably 2-7, something like that. But yeah, it's not great. They're certainly much better off with Huke, at least from what we've seen with these qualifiers. But we'll talk about Pred and how he debuted with his new team, very shortly. I think the second biggest story of the weekend was the Toronto Ultra versus Boston Breach matchup. A match I certainly was not expecting to talk about with any kind of depth, or I wasn't expecting to really talk about it more than just say like, hey, Toronto beat Boston, and that was kind of the end of that. Unfortunately, it turned into a much bigger story because Toronto ends up forfeiting this series. They were down 2-0. They lost by a ton in Hardpoint, nearly 100-point clubbed in the opening Hardpoint. They lose 6-4 in S&D. And then there's a delay after the second map, and Toronto just says, screw it. We're not playing anymore. And I don't remember how many forfeits there have been. I know there have been a few, but Toronto decides, we're not going to deal with this. We're forfeiting, and so technically it is a 3-0 win for the Boston Breach. So the Breach are back up, as I would like to say. And they kind of explained, the Ultra did their side of the story. Joe Deceives went on Twitter, and he was candid, which I was not really. I kind of expect it from players, but, you never really know what you're going to get entirely. But he said, he had a Twitter thread. He said, after all the bullshit we've and other teams been through with online servers, we are not doing that shit again with how bad we are rubber banding GG's Boston play LAT next week. He went on to say, we brought it up to the league time and time again, and nothing ever changes. If anything, the responses get worse. This is hilarious. Had my own coach recording my POV from behind me, and they still don't believe us. Fucking hilarious. They have integrity cams behind us to see all of our POVs, and they don't do anything with it, just a useless camera behind us for fun. So obviously he was upset, rightfully so, with what he is saying. What do you think about this whole situation? Online server issues in general have been horrible this season. There's been a lot of delays. It has really kind of hampered the viewing experience online. But we haven't seen very many forfeits in the CDL. What do you think about this whole situation?
So to answer that first, the only other straight up forfeit I can remember is the scump or just the OpTic. It would it have been OpTic Texas, or was it still OpTic Chicago? It was in Vanguard, or not even Vanguard. It was in um World War II or MW2. Jesus, I can't talk right now because it was on LSC low control, and it's when Toronto, yeah, because it was Cammy. Would have called, or was he? I don't remember. It was the SAE thing where there was something got glitched out when they called in the score streak, and OpTic was like, yeah, we're just not gonna play. Screw that. So that's the only straight up forfeit I can remember, because there have been other times where like stuff has happened and players have been subbed in and you play with a substitute and whatnot. But those are this and in that instance with the SAE for whatever iteration of OpTic it was, those are the only two forfeits I can recall. But I do think just overall, like the people have kind of been joking about that. I've seen like, oh, Joe DeCeve's gonna get fined, yada yada. But like, I do think it's kind of you know important in a sense that if they feel this is a big enough issue to take a stand on it against the CDL, and this is they think the best way to do something or for some positive change to come, then who am I to disagree with them? Like, yeah, it sucks that they didn't finish out the map, but like if they're just getting shit on because they can't even shoot straight and they're rubber banding with lag and all that, like what's the difference between uh, another 3-0 in control where they get slammed for 10 minutes versus just, not playing it. So I see both sides of the situation. I do think big picture, kind of like you said, this really, going back to earlier in the weekend, Toronto playing Atlanta, there were multiple delays in that series too, and I was kind of just like, wow, what the hell is going on here? And that kind of got the wheels turning that, maybe something's going on when you add in the delays were in that series and then Toronto's second match against Boston. Um as also the nature of Toronto beat Atlanta in both hard points, and then they got absolutely slammed in a hard point by Boston. So I was sitting here like, what the hell is going on? Then, the delays start happening after map two, and the Scump Watch Party starts speculating about there may be server issues. Draza had a pretty funny tweet about exit lag, which apparently is something you can download to try and it's not a VPN, but it's like something that can help, which I had never even heard of before this. So I thought that was kind of funny. But regardless, yeah, I think that's the bigger picture thing here is I think you and I have been in agreement for a while now, at least, like maybe not initially during the CDL and era and stuff, but like just the way the CDL is headed and everything, the online Call of Duty isn't as good as LAN Call of Duty, but online Call of Duty is inevitably going to be a part of the CDL, like in perpetuity, feels like. So like it's just something that is going to exist in this form to some degree, and not we, the league and the teams and everybody involved on the back end have to do everything they can to make it as fair of an experience as possible so that the product being put on stream for viewers and everything like that is the best product. And you also want it to be, the best for the people actually playing, because then if you get in situations like that, like it didn't happen, but Aches has been doing some of these streams lately where he goes down history, the history of Call of Duty titles, been spending a lot of time on Black Ops 2 and talking about how champs obviously used to be earlier in the season because it was like part of a promotion for the DLC packs and whatnot. And obviously it's a totally different era now because like they add maps and stuff for free. You don't even have to pay for DLC packs or anything like that. But for lack of a better example, let's just say, this weekend we had dealership, new map, new S&D map added to the rotation. Let's just say Toronto was playing that map. It was the first time this map is being shown on the CDL broadcast, and the CDL obviously wants to like showcase this map to maybe attract more people to the game, attract more people to ranked play. In a world where you had to pay for this map, they want to entice people to pay for the map pack or whatever, if that was still a thing. And this sort of situation happens where there's just delays, lag, people like it's not the best product, and that's not going to reflect well on everybody involved, right? Like, and it trickles all the way down to like me. Like, if I'm just a little Timmy, 10 years old, watching this, and I'm like, oh, this is well, what the hell is going on here? Why is nobody playing? Like, I don't really give a shit anymore. And then I turn off the stream, and then it's like, I kind of talked in a circle there. But long story short, I feel like at the end of the day, this is just another notch in the belt, in the sense of like stuff going on behind the scenes that in some cases it gets brushed to the side, it feels like, and in this case it wasn't. And Toronto was willing to take a match loss, a map loss here, in order to hopefully try and get things fixed. And I mean, we don't even know what the the actual issue is, because like I saw a clip of the flank talking afterwards, saying that like maybe it's something with like the servers being used for practice and scrims before matches aren't the same exact server being used for matches, in the sense of like there's multiple Denver servers or multiple Chicago servers, and like if you get put on one Chicago server for a scrim, it feels good, but then you get put on a Chicago server in a match and it doesn't feel the same. Like, I'm no tech expert, so I don't know all the intricacies about that and everything like that. But end of the day, Toronto decided to forfeit to hopefully, on their behalf, try and enact some positive change here to the online infrastructure of the league. This isn't the first time we've heard about issues with servers and whatnot this year. But it is the first time no, there was that C9 Toronto match where it felt a little weird too. So this has probably been going on for a while in Toronto. It's just like they've had enough. So end of the day, will be interesting to see if anything actually comes of this, in the sense of changes or fixes to potentially try and improve the state of whatever happened to Toronto. But just like we kind of did for the first couple months of this season with Cloud9 and the internet issues, now every match that Toronto plays in these online qualifiers for the rest of the season, they played 2 this weekend, so they got 8 left. Every match we're going to have to keep an eye on to see if something similar goes on, unless we hear like some sort of announcement, or the players come out and say something's fixed, etc.
The first thing I'll say is, if they had finished this match and they said, all right, like whatever, we'll just play this game 3, they get stomped in game 3, or maybe they even win, they play game 4, they lose or whatever. No one really talks about this, other than just like, or nobody really remembers it past like a week. It might be something that we reference like when we talk about Toronto online or whatever, but it's not nearly as big of a deal, because forfeiting is such a departure from what we've seen online. Like, a lot of times it's the players just get through it and then they talk a bunch of crap and they complain about it on Twitter. Okay, that happens and everybody forgets about it. I don't think people are going to like easily forget about this because of the circumstances around it. That being said, this is probably just like the new normal, not forfeits necessarily, but just the fact that we have all of these online issues. It feels like every week or every other week there is something where people are like, oh, is there server issues, or there will be a match and it's just like the Toronto C9 match that you referenced. Like, it's just so far and away unusual in how dominant one team is that you're like, what's going on there? I just think that's the way that Call of Duty is now. Like you said, like, online is not going away. If anything, the CDL, I would imagine, lose money on all of their LAN events. So logically, if you're just thinking about it as a financial property or whatever, then they're more likely to make majors online than it is that they go to a LAN league like these players want. It's more likely that they would say, hey, like, maybe champs will be on LAN or whatever, but everything else is online and you're just going to deal with it, that's way more likely than saying, hey, everything is on LAN now and nothing is online. But it is also just another, you said a notch in the belt. Like, if you want to be super, super negative, you say it's a black mark. If you want to be like less negative, you could just say that it is another kind of hit to the reputation of Activision, Microsoft, the Call of Duty League in general, because it has been 5 years since the CDL went to computer or went to PC, and we have made no progress on this front. Servers should not be consistently an issue with the Call of Duty League if it is a priority for Call of Duty. We know that it is not a priority for Call of Duty. So like, that's why we're having these issues year after year after year. And online should not be as great of a focus for the Call of Duty League unless Call of Duty and Call of Duty esports is not a priority for the game, because League of Legends has, I don't know if they make money on the LCS, like the in-person studio and everything, but they've kind of figured it out. Like, League of Legends does this with the LEC, they do this with LPL, LCK. They're like, yeah, screw that online crap. We're going to do on LAN every week, or every split. Like, this is going to be on LAN. Call of Duty is just, it's not a priority esports is not a priority to Call of Duty. And this is kind of like the result of that. We've seen so many complaints about the server stuff. This time around with the Challengers Open, that was the most complaints I've seen from the Challengers community about like the integrity of the tournament. So I think everything is in general just getting worse, or at least staying the same, which by extension seems worse, because when you have year over year, you expect progress, you expect improvement, and nothing like that has come for the CDL or for Challengers. So yeah, it sucks. I'm sure it sucks for Toronto that they felt like they had to do this, or got to the point that they were so frustrated that they were like, screw this. That's certainly, especially against a team that they probably should beat most of the time. And the fact that they just said, okay, like, we're just going to forfeit this, and hopefully there will be something done. I'm not optimistic about that. I'm sure you're not either, that there's going to be any kind of major improvement or drastic change within the CDL. But yeah, that's the life that we're living. This is the reality that we're in with Call of Duty esports. And I would expect it to remain relatively the same for the coming years. I don't see like a reason why why Activision or Microsoft would change anything, to be honest. Like, this is like a drop in the bucket. This is like a side project. It's like a side project of a side project of a side project, basically. It feels like so far removed from like mainstream Call of Duty that they're not going to drastically move things around to adjust and to improve the CDL. So this is just something we have to deal with, I guess. But yeah, I hope it gets resolved for Toronto. I hope that they get some kind of satisfaction out of it, or maybe they get the last laugh, but highly doubt so. Next up, we have the Vegas Falcons. They were certainly one of the most interesting teams coming into this. I would say OpTic number one, simply because they're, I think they're the biggest team, and them playing Kenny in the first match was always going to be intriguing. But the Vegas Falcons, they started off these qualifiers with this brand new roster. They, like we talked about on the last pod, I believe, they went in completely different direction with their roster. Before, they were an all Saudi roster. They were kind of dedicated to that mission of like a Middle Eastern roster, making it into the CDL and hopefully succeeding. Obviously, that did not work. They were the worst team and still remain to be the worst team in CDL history. But they looked much improved this week. This was the first match, not so much. The first match was not their best performance, and it had some people jokingly and probably not jokingly saying that Vegas actually got worse after this first match where they got dominated by the Vancouver Surge. None of the three maps were close at all. But the second match against the Miami Heretics to start off Saturday, first and foremost, they won a hard point. This was historic. This was like Alex Ovechkin breaking Gretzky's record. It felt like it was never going to be done. But the Vegas Falcons, they win a hard point. And not only do they win one, but they win 2 hard points in a series. They beat the Heretics in Skyline hard point and Hacienda hard point. And yet they still lose the series. They lose the first search in a round 11. They lose the control, and then they lose Game 5, which was also the first time that Vegas had forced a Game 5 all season long. So while Vegas is still winless, this is the best that they have looked all year long. And I think there's reason to be optimistic about this roster. And if you're one of those people like me and Bink, where we said at the beginning of the season, there's no way they're not going to win one match, you should feel a lot more confident after this week than you did coming into this week, or certainly 2 or 3 weeks ago. How confident are you now after seeing, maybe not the Vancouver match, maybe just delete that one from your memory, but after seeing their performance against Miami, how confident are you that they're eventually going to win one match?
Yeah, definitely. I think you phrased it the best way, is that you have to, especially compared to the All Saudi project, like their odds have to be improved right now at this point. And I think that's just like the main takeaway here. I think, well, first and foremost, I want to shout out Clay. Before the opening match, he tweeted stuff that he had to go to the hospital because of some stroke symptoms or scary stuff like that he was tweeting. So I know how much you like Clay, and obviously we both are big fans, longtime fans. So hope everything works out well for him and he's feeling better. But I think just the overall for the first match against Vancouver, like I think it was even a flank clip of Ake saying like, is this the worst AR duo like ever, the most mid, but talking about Arcides and Priesta. And I saw some other, just the sentiment around that first match for Vegas, and I just don't know what the expectation was for that first match. It felt like yeah, I again don't want to speak for Aches, but it felt like the comments of any regard for that first match were just like completely disregarding what Vancouver had just recently did and how well they've played, and they're inarguably a top 3, top 2 team in the game. I think top 3 is much better to say. So it's like new roster with less than a week of practice gets slammed by the team that was just in the grand finals of the last event. Like I don't think that's a super outlandish thing, and I think that was kind of like how we felt going into these matches. It was like this was obviously a hard first test, and then the Miami match was going to be a better gauge just because Miami was also making a change, bringing in Super. And, although it's not like a 3-person change, it's still a different roster, and that we both ended up picking up Miami. And I remember saying, like, I'm going to defer to the chemistry that's pre-existing there with the Miami guys versus a team that's, hasn't really played much together yet up to this point. But I do think for that Miami match, I mean, the whatever you think about Vegas and the Falcons organization and all the stuff associated with that team so far this season and whatnot, the jubilation and just reaction that Xnid had after winning the map 1 of this series, like if that didn't tug at your heartstrings a little bit, I don't know what you're doing, because that was just like, that felt like literally I think it was 0-28 up to that point in hard point, and it felt like the biggest weight had to have been lifted off his shoulders, and he was just ecstatic. And if it's hard to come across like moments like that in the grand scheme of things probably aren't a huge deal when we're 10 years from now talking about Call of Duty history, but at least right now in the present, that felt like that felt like he needed, a small win in that regard, even though if it's not like a small win, obviously it was a very big deal for him, but for lack of better phrasing, he needed that, and just the emotion he showed after they got that win, that I felt happy for him and everyone associated with that project and the whole team. Um, and then he even carried it over into the map 2, dealership S&D, which I kind of mentioned, just with my bad example of not paying for maps and everything like that. But I thought, dealership was a pretty entertaining map for the couple times we got to see it this weekend. And even the Scump Watch Party, they were talking about how they were expecting it to be one of the fastest maps, and a lot of instant action and whatnot. And I felt like there were some instances of that, but there were also some longer drawn out maps or rounds, and that was encapsulated in this came down to round 11. It was, I believe, a 1v1 for Xnit, and he was in like one of the little rooms by the bomb site, and he lost that 1v1. I can't remember who it was alive for Miami, but I thought that map, for what I had heard about it heading into this, I was expecting it to just be not a great map, and maybe teams avoiding it because it was just a throw in to try and change up the map set. But I thought there were some interesting moments. We'll have to see if teams continue to play it or whatnot. But some limited sample size so far, I didn't totally hate it. But back on track with Vegas, I mean that was kind of to be expected. I feel like for this showdown with Miami, in the sense of, like I said, when there's a newer team that you're 3/4 of the Vegas squad is brand new, and we've talked about it before, newer teams, they're going to practice the respawns more, and they might not practice the search as much, and they're playing a team that only made a 1-person change, so they have just more search reps together, they being Miami in this instance. So it makes a little more sense to me that Miami was able to win the searches here, but 2 hardpoint wins in this series, pretty big accomplishment for Vegas, all things considered. And it definitely feels like they are clawing their way towards potentially getting that first series for the Vegas Falcons. I think it's an uphill battle, though. It's going to be tough still, because I mean, like, they win 2 hard points here, but like, how consistent are they going to be in a mode that they've struggled in? Obviously different rosters and whatnot, yada yada, so I'm not going to get too into it. But I also just want to shout out Super getting his shot in the roster full time. We saw him limited basis filling in for medals at one point, and the talk, not at that time, but afterwards, was that he was an AR filling in for a sub, so maybe he didn't get to play his natural role or whatever, and now he's filling in for Lucky, or has replaced Lucky, which means he gets to play that AR, and he kind of shined in this match with a 1.35 KD. The CDL actually just tweeted out the KD leaderboard 25 minutes ago for the week 1 qualifiers, and Super was in first with that 1.35 KD, so he's got the highest KD so far in Major 3 qualifiers. Obviously it's only 1 match, so it is what it is, but all things considered, pretty strong start for Super. But like you said, and just overall with Vegas, I think it, they got to be happy, and especially Xnit, and they got to be happy about getting that first hardpoint win, and maybe that like frees them up to maybe take some more risks in hard points that maybe they were too cautious to take before. And maybe like some of those can translate to wins. I don't really know, but we'll have to see where Vegas goes from here.
They're certainly in a better position just in terms of talent. I think it was probably unfair of anybody to kind of loop Xnid into the same category as some of the other players that had been on this Vegas roster as like undeserving, and they weren't skilled enough to be there. That being said, I do feel happy for him. Like you said, like just to see the joy that was on his face about just winning a map, kind of getting the monkey off his back, to be a part of this roster and just be certainly the most maligned team in the entire game. and probably the most maligned probably since the Paris Legion. So like it's great for them to get that win. Great for him in particular to get that win. But yeah, it's gonna be tough. Like it isn't a guarantee that they're going to win. They only have so they have 3 matches left in the qualifiers for here. They have 5 matches next time, and then we could just say if they get first rounded in each of each of the majors, so that gives them 10 matches. They have 10 matches to win one, and I will say in some of those it's like okay they play the Boston Breach at the end of these qualifiers, so you should have some more confidence that could happen. They play like they played Miami again in the major 4 qualifiers. They play like C9 Minnesota. We'll see how those teams kind of pan out at that point in the season. So there are opportunities, it seems like, for this team to get a win. But yeah, it's not a guarantee. But I do think, like I said at the beginning, like this is a good step. There should be more optimism, maybe a little more confidence that it'll eventually happen. But yeah, this is even if they don't win any, and that would really suck. That would be horrific to actually have a team go an entire season without winning anything. I do think that if they're able to keep Pred, I don't know his contract situation, but assuming they can keep Pred for next season and then get into free agency and build a roster around him, especially if they're able to spend a bunch of money and try to attract big free agents to Vegas. That's what I would be looking forward to for the Falcons. And if Clayster is going to be the head coach, I don't know what obviously, like you said, all the best to him and his health stuff. Certainly don't wish that upon anyone. So hopefully he makes a full recovery and everything is fine. But if he is the head coach next season, what kind of team is he going to build? I don't know if, he tweeted something, I think late last week or early this week, where he basically said like, why are you doubting me that I can build a roster? So I think he has the confidence that he can do it. I think if they have the money to do that and they're really committed to the idea of winning and being a competitive team and not trying to make a statement, so to speak, then I think it could really happen. I do think that Vegas could be even a contender if they're able to really compete in terms of salary and whatever benefits they can offer their players. But obviously that's far down the road. But right now what we're talking about is their prospect of winning, and I do think they will eventually win. It'd be very funny and kind of crazy if it was against like a top team or against OpTic, because their next 2 matches are against OpTic and FaZe. So obviously either one of those would be really crazy to win. And then they finish out the season with LAT and FaZe, at least in the qualifiers. We'll see what happens at the major. But yeah, like that's hard sledding, I would say, or tough sledding for Vegas as they move forward with this new roster. And, it's probably going to take a little bit of time for this team to get its feet under them. I don't know how much practice they had with this four-man group, but, Priesta was just on LAG, Arcides was just in Challengers, so at most like a week and a half of practice before these matches. So hopefully with a little more practice, they can be even more competitive, even better. And we did talk about Minnesota. So I obviously that was a big point, and hopefully Kenny is able to get a few wins and kind of keep, stay in the CDL, which did not seem like a certainty by any means after his OpTic stint. But yeah, that's probably the biggest things from this week of the matches. I do want to say real quick that Toronto beating Atlanta FaZe right before they forfeit to the Boston Breach is pretty crazy by itself. Like, FaZe undoubtedly the best team in the game. There's no debate about that. But yeah, they lose their first match of the qualifiers, which I think they might have done that. Didn't they do that in Major 2 as well?
They did because Major 1, remember, they started 0-3, and we're sitting here talking about roster changes. Let me go back and I think their first match might have been, their first match of the year was against Toronto. They lost that 3-1. And obviously last set they play Vancouver and Neptune's debut with that team. So they are 0-1 in their first match of all 3 qualifier sets this season, which is definitely interesting. Maybe plays into my partially serious but mostly non-serious theory of the 1 seed being cursed this season. Maybe they're just like, yeah, screw the 1 seed, we want the 2 seed.
Maybe. Yeah, I mean they started off poor in the first qualifiers. I think they lost 3 of their first 4, if I'm not mistaken, and then they won the rest. They basically look like, I think they won the first minor as well, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
Yes. And then they obviously, the second one, they go 6-1. They lose that first match. They win 6 in a row. They didn't do particularly well in the second minor, but then they win the second major. So, it's probably one of those things that we probably shouldn't read too much into it. Like, as long as FaZe isn't gonna like do what OpTic did and just like lose all of their matches or just like completely tank, I think they have to be the favorite heading into Major 3. Especially because LAT, we'll see what happens with them as these qualifiers go along, but they looked very good to start off their qualifiers. It's just, I can't I can't, pick against FaZe unless, it happens on LAN and there's some kind of good reason to do so.
And I just think in general, since we're on the topic of Atlanta right now, like heading into today's match, or at least after the first map of today's match against Carolina, Atlanta had lost the 2 hard points to Atlanta. We don't know what this deal is, how the server stuff for Toronto may have impacted Atlanta's ability to play to their best in that series. Don't want to take anything away from Toronto, but I mean, they lose both hard points. Atlanta lost both hard points to Toronto. Then they lose map 1 hard point to Carolina. We've talked about Carolina's hard point at length now, and I saw that and I'm like, what am I going to be talking about later tonight on the show? Then they go 6-0 in the search, 3-0 in the control, 9-0 straight rounds in the S&D and control. And I'm like, all right, I don't got to worry about it. We're back a little bit. But then that map 4 is 250 to 242. And that get a little hairy at the end there. It looked like it was in that, I think it's P4 is the down low site on protocol. And Atlanta got the 249. And that hill is like kind of one that's very hard to break and has been all season, but like Atlanta only needed 1 point. So like it felt like they were kind of like internally battling. Like, do we go for the 1 second or do we just like leave it and fully set up for the P1? But like then that has its own issue because historically P1s are like some of the most open hard points in any map, and they're super hard to lock down. You can die from a lot of angles. So it felt like it was a pretty chaotic ending, and they were able to get it done in the end there on that P1 like right as it spawned. But it is interesting to me that they, I was going to maybe say like maybe Atlanta was trying to experiment a little with hardpoint maps, which I guess could be the case. But in these 2 matches, they played 4 different hardpoint maps. So that doesn't scream to me like they, obviously the way vetoes work can dictate that a little bit. I feel like they've been pretty solid at red card all year, so I'm not surprised to not see red card. And that kind of makes me think, yes, maybe they might be trying to experiment with their map pool a little bit. But the fact that we didn't see like a repeat of any map for the hard points in the series makes me think like there's a chance that they might not be. So I'm going to be keeping an eye on that. Just historically with this Atlanta FaZe team, obviously Crowder's one of the best Call of Duty coaches of all time. And historically, Atlanta FaZe always finishes in first in the CDL standings, CDL points standings, and that has always gifted them this opportunity where it feels like every season they have a chance to test their map pool heading into champs. And I wouldn't be surprised if that's something they're starting to talk about. I just don't know if it's actually happening here, and part of the reason they lost 3 or 4 hard points this weekend.
Yeah, it's possible. Like you said, we have seen that in the past where it feels like they're not taking it as seriously as like, we need to win every single map, or they're really even trying to. That winning is not the only priority, I should say, is probably the best way to put it. But yeah, that might be the case. We'll have to see. Atlanta FaZe still, the favorite. I will say though that LAT looked very, very good in the one match they
Yep.
played, which was definitely encouraging. It's not like I was doubting LAT because I still thought they were at worst the third best team in the league coming into the qualifiers. But for them to beat Vancouver in their one match this week and to do it very convincingly, a pretty pretty one-sided 3-0 is it's very good. It's a great sign for a team that just needed, for I guess the community's sake, because if they lose this match, I think there will be more people saying, "Oh my God, what's wrong with the Thieves? Is there, do they need to make a roster change?" Blah blah blah. But like this is a big win, and it really sets them up very well for the rest of these qualifiers.
And I just think, I mean, this is the second 3-0 in a row that we've seen between these two teams after their, best of 7 showdown in the minor 2 grand finals. I think this could just be, we've talked about it before with like the top 4 and like the square diagram of like New York was, well, that was a weird one because like New York and Thieves were beating FaZe, but like FaZe was beating OpTic or whatever. Right now, I mean, you could kind of look at the top 3 as a triangle where it's like FaZe have been beating LA Thieves have been beating Vancouver, and Vancouver have been beating FaZe. It's not the biggest sample size, but it's more than one sample size because Vancouver is 2-0 against FaZe. I think FaZe lost the first online qualifier, but then beat them in the minor and twice at Major 1. So I think FaZe is 3-1 against Thieves, maybe 4-1. And then Thieves are 3-0 against Vancouver. So it's not like a one match triangle here that I'm trying to draw attention to, but it's it's at least a couple matches so it could be a thing. It might not be. We'll have to see. But now that I'm thinking about it, didn't Oh no, Atlanta obviously beat Vancouver twice at Major 2, so that was pretty stupid. But
Vancouver beat FaZe twice online,
yes,
and then lost to them twice on land. And I think with LAT, at least especially with FaZe losing their one match against Toronto this weekend, LAT have the path to the first seed at Major 3, because obviously they only play one match this week, so they still have to play 4 of the next 2 weeks, but they play C9 in Toronto next week, so I think we could all say that Toronto is their toughest matchup there. And then they play LAG and Carolina in week 3. Obviously, LAG, we'll see what happens like with them if they're able to kind of turn around, be more competitive. And LAG has historically beaten LAT in the past, so like maybe that plays into it. But LAG is certainly one of the worst teams in the league. And Carolina has been just like no match at all for LAT. It's been one of the most lopsided matchups with like actually comparative teams or comparable teams all season long. So they have a real shot at going 5-0, getting that first seed, which would certainly help them. Even OpTic, who is 2-0, like we said, so they really only have to win 3 matches. They play Atlanta FaZe in their last matchup of the qualifiers in week 3, so that's kind of the roadblock that they have. But yeah, LAT has a really good shot at being the number 1 seed, and that theoretically sets you up for the easiest path through Major 3. That hasn't always worked out because I think the number 1 seed at both of the majors has literally lost in round 1, and LAT, I mean, it's just...
It was OpTic in Major 1,
yeah.
LAT last major.
Yeah, and they've both finished like top 6-ish, like, or something like that.
OpTic was top 8 Major 1. LAT came in 4th last major.
By law of averages, that's 6th. So we're good. But yeah, that's a good spot for them. I don't think I don't think they need to be avoiding it, I should say. It's probably not the greatest strategy unless it's like, I don't know, Atlanta FaZe gets 8th, and then you're like, yeah, we don't want 8. We don't want 1. We want 2 or 3 or whatever. But yeah, that's about it. I think I don't think there was anything else that really stood out. Anything that stood out to you this week?
No, I'll run down the matches real quick.
Yeah,
and if anything else comes up, we can talk about it there. But just to give you guys the actual scores to all the matches since we switched up the format and trying something out a little bit here. Vegas versus Vancouver kicked us off on Friday. Vancouver won 3-0, as we talked about. OpTic 3-2 against Minnesota, talked about that. Toronto 3-2 over Atlanta, we talked about that one too. Miami 3-2 Vegas to start Saturday's matches. Carolina beat LAG 3-1. We didn't really talk about that match a lot, but that was obviously the Johnny and Fellow debut on the new LAG roster. And the map one was pretty close. I think you could make the case that LAG should have closed that out, but Carolina was just able to take a 250-243 win. And Gwyn in particular was looking like, Gwinternet. A lot of people were joking. Even Maven was saying Gwinternet on stream, so that's becoming a thing now, and we're gonna have to, again, once we get back to land, see how Gwyn shows up there. But really the big story in that matchup, Carolina looked good in the searches. That they've been a really strong search team all year. But Slasher 37-21 in a 100-point win, 250-146 on red card Hardpoint to close out this series. So shout out Slasher, still playing pretty well in most of these online qualifiers. I know I've said it a couple times on the show. It feels like Slasher's been a better player online than on land this year, which is just something I did not expect to say heading into this year. So Carolina won that one 3-1 over LAG. Then we had OpTic 3-0 C9, talked about that. And Boston technically winning 3-0 over Toronto, a bit of an asterisk with the map 3 forfeit, but Boston at least won 2-0. They won the first two maps, but asterisks over that series just for the the online issues and whatnot. And today, Minnesota beat Boston 3-2. We indirectly talked about the series just as another Game 5, Round 11 for Minnesota in both of their matches, but also in the Game 4, Minnesota won 250-112 on red card Hardpoint, and Kenny was 30-15, which is a perfect 2 KD. And if you tell OpTic fans who had to witness Kenny drop 0.7 KDs, last stage, and you tell them he's dropping a 2.0 KD in a Hardpoint this stage, they probably aren't too happy about that, but definitely encouraging sign for Kenny. They won both Hardpoints in this series, so again, I think Minnesota is heading in the right direction if they continue to, if Kenny gets acclimated to playing with the three other guys on this team who I spoke highly of at multiple points this year. I think Minnesota could be making a late push for champs heading into Major 3 in the end of the year. And then we had Atlanta 3-1 Carolina and LAT 3-0 Vancouver. Talked about those. So yeah, that's 10 matches this weekend. Flew by.
The standings so far through week 1, obviously this is completely different from the format that we've had in the past. There's only 5 total qualifying matches for these teams, so each win and by extension each loss means more to these teams in these qualifiers than in the first two. So OpTic, like we mentioned, is 2-0, so technically they're the first place team because, again, they're the only team that played 2 matches that won both of those matches. LAT and Miami are tied for second at 1-0, and then Boston, FaZe, Rocker, Carolina, Vancouver, and Toronto, those teams are all 1-1, so technically they're tied for fourth. We'll see how it all works out and all shakes out over the next few weeks. LAG and Cloud9 are both 0-1, and the Vegas Falcons are at the bottom of the standings. They're 0-2. Of course, some of these teams will play 2 matches next week, or they'll play 2 matches the following week. So there's a lot to play for. I think we talked about it on the last episode, or maybe 2 episodes ago now, with champs coming up really quickly. Actually, like the end of the regular season is 6 weeks away or something like that. So there aren't that many opportunities. There's no minors, so it's really just online qualifiers and the majors. So these teams really have to pick it up if you're at the bottom or near the bottom of the standings to ensure you're going to champs this year. And of course, 4 teams, regardless of whatever happens over these last 6 or 7 weeks, will not be going to champs, and that will be a major disappointment for many of those teams. But yeah, that about does it for the show. It's a little bit shorter of a show, but obviously we'll be back on Wednesday to talk about whatever there is to talk about. If there are any roster changes, which I don't expect there to be roster changes, but when you're this late in the season, there could be some maybe irrational changes or really just panic changes because there are teams like C9. Them losing is just like, okay, maybe we need to make a change, just using them as an example. But certainly there are always the possibility of roster changes at this point in the season. But yeah, that about does it. We'll be back on Wednesday to talk about whatever happens between Sunday and Wednesday, and then we'll preview week 2 of the Major 3 qualifiers. You can like, subscribe, or follow the podcast feed wherever you're listening or watching on. We're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, and YouTube. You can watch the live streams of the podcast on YouTube and twitch.tv/Ego Chall Podcast. The YouTube channel, I believe, is at 217 subscribers, I believe. So please subscribe if you're not already. You can follow us on Twitter as well, at jbink with 2Ks, at Pres Byers, and the podcast tours at Ego Chall Podcast. You can also follow Bink on Twitch, twitch.tv/jbink with 2Ks. We'll be back on Wednesday. And Bink, take it away.
Did you do the pick'em breakdown? I didn't hear it.
Oh no, I did not. So we both went 6-4, so no changes in terms of the advantage that you have, but so 6-4 this week gives you a 102-50 record, and I am now 96-56 on the season.
Pretty good, all things considered. But like you said, I think more importantly, the time for teams to make roster changes is dwindling in terms of how effective a roster change could be. Because you could they even said it on this, maybe it was one of the OpTic videos or just on the Scum Watch for, I don't remember, but they were like, when's the roster lock? Like, technically teams could make changes before champs. It's just like, the time for it to be effective and potentially actually have ramifications that dictate what's going on for the rest of the season. That time is dwindling, at least in my eyes. Now with EWC, we saw last year with Boston them making the change after not making champs and then making multiple changes to the roster they have now for EWC. So I guess keeping that in mind, there is a little more time for changes to be made. But end of the day, I just think not expecting anything crazy to happen before the matches this week, but I definitely do think some teams might be considering it, and if they are considering it at all, like the door for that to remain open is slowly creaking shut, at least for me. So overall I just think pretty good weekend of matches. Really enjoyed it, and it's just the season is slowly, we got 2 more weeks of qualifying matches straight into Major 3, and then right after that it's just 3 weeks of qualifying matches into Major 4. So the season, we won't really have a true break until the lead up to champs, and then after that the lead up to EWC. But if you're here for the long haul, we got some exciting matches coming up. We'll be breaking down everything on Wednesday for the Major 2 qualifiers coming up in week 2, Major 3 week 2. Other than that, thank you guys for the support. Shout out to K Dizzle and VVS Wealth in the YouTube chat for showing up and interacting there. And otherwise, we'll see you guys back here on Wednesday. Thank you as always.